The momentum is shifting. Ukraine is on the front foot and taking this war to Moscow. Aerial strikes on oil refineries have caused maximum damage to Vladimir Putin. But for all the talk of military objectives, the front lines and frenzied international diplomacy, there is one other tragic dimension that few, if any, are talking about, and that is the plight of the children. 1.6 million Ukrainian children are currently living under Russian rule in occupied territory. A further 20,000 have been forcibly detained, deported and kidnapped by the Russian state. Their names have been changed, their dates and places of birth altered, and all memory of their Ukrainian heritage erased. But there is one leading light who refuses to let the world forget. She is the children's champion, Ukraine's First Lady, Olena Zelenska. Can I begin just by asking you that we talk a great deal, don't we, about the front line, the military objectives and the strategies and the politics, but we speak much less, possibly not enough, about the children and the suffering that they are going through. Do you agree with that? And is it painful for you to witness?
I
agree with you that we talk very little about the children. First, they are the foremost and most vulnerable victims of this war, because they are the least protected and the youngest. Unfortunately, we don't remember their suffering every day when we talk about this war. Yes, there is the front line, there are military losses, there are political dimensions of this war. However, we strive for victory precisely so that there is a life ahead. The life ahead is our children. We must ensure that our children's generation grow up to be psychologically stable people, so that they have the strength to live, have all their opportunities for development. Unfortunately, despite the many important issues currently being discussed in political circles and on international platforms, the issue of children remains behind the curtains. I would really like this issue to be heard more loudly. This is a very painful and very important humanitarian aspect of this war. You are absolutely right to say that for many of our children, the war has already become the background of their lives. In other words, they are living their lives during the war. The war has already been going on for 4 years, and there are children who were born during the war. But I would not want to say, for example, that a bomb shelter is an extension of their home. It should not be like this. We strive not to normalize this way of life for children during the war. Children understand for sure that not all their peers in the world have to go to shelters during a normal school day. They understand for sure that it is unfair for them that they live a non-complete life, that they cannot plan for the next few years of their childhood because they don't know what will happen to them tomorrow. This feeling of uncertainty and uncertainty about the future is the constant background in which our children live. Approximately 70% of Ukrainians have a psychological state of constant tension, and all this is happening to our children. Aside of it being unfair, we should not let this next generation of Ukrainian children to be called the generation of children of war. We strive to do everything possible to reduce all the consequences that may follow this war. That is why psychological support, support for education at all levels, and support for a normal childhood, everything we can do in Ukraine is being done deliberately, because we do not believe that we should deal with all of these issues only after the war ends. We have to think about this now, because, again, we do not know when this war will end. I'm sure that we are doing everything right, so this is not a lost generation. Secondly, there is a very encouraging information from psychologists who say that a child's physique is more flexible and adapts to the conditions in which the child lives. We hope that there will be a post-traumatic growth. We hope that for some of the children it will be the opposite, and that they will receive more skills in order to be psychologically strong, to be more adaptable to different living conditions of life in the modern society. We hope for this and are trying to strengthen all the opportunities so that psychological strength, the ability to adapt, the skills of the future, all the skills that are needed for a person in the future, will will be available to our children. I don't think that our children will become a lost generation. The impact of the war is inevitable and will continue to exist. As I said, it can be completely different for different people. Each person has their own psychological system, their own possibilities for adaptation and survival in different, extremely difficult conditions. Just like children, I hope that we are taking the right steps in developing all Ukrainian mental health program, which was created precisely so that everyone who needs it can get timely and affordable psychological help. Again, we are creating underground schools. It may sound gloomy, but this is the only way so that children can study offline in those regions where it's dangerous to just go to a regular school. I remember when I first heard about the idea of an underground school, I had a lot of doubts about whether it was a good idea. But then when we saw the first school children who started attending such schools, especially in Kharkiv, we saw how important it is for children, how happy they were to see their peers and classmates again, to be able to touch their teachers. It is incredibly important to have the opportunity for normal social development. A person is a social creature. We need those like us to feel protected. When our children study for a long time, only online, they lose social connections. They lose the ability to communicate normally. This can have a very bad effect on their future. That is why we need psychological support, as many children as possible to return to school. We need special services, especially special psychological rehabilitation camps for children who have suffered psychological trauma during the war. It is difficult for me to put into one answer everything we are doing to ensure that the consequences are less harmful for our children. However, our children see how their neighbors and friends die. Our children take part in funerals of their classmates who were pulled from the ruins of their own home yesterday. Our children are forced to leave their hometowns and live in other regions or even in other countries, losing family, friends, everything you are used to. This cannot but take its toll, but all of this can be worked through. We are consciously developing such services, systems, and support in order to ensure that all of this goes through with as little pain as possible, if that is possible. I think this is a normal story for people from a democratic country who understand what human rights, children's rights are, to not believe that it's possible in a modern world, because this is absolute destruction of all values that a modern person has. There are many scenarios which children end up in Russian hands. I won't list them all. The main ones are, of course, that at the beginning of the war, a large number of children were taken away when the Russians entered the region, and literally during the fighting took children who had no adults or parents with them, without asking their parents. Adults might even have been nearby. The children were taken out of the streets in Mariupol. Entire institutions were taken away, orphanages, hospitals. This happened without any agreement with the Ukrainian side. Russians tried to say that it was done to save the children from the dangers of war. However, this cannot be explained by the chaos of war alone. Any conscious adult person, even if they believe they are saving a child, the first thing they would do once the child is safe is try to find out if there are parents or guardians responsible for them. The Russian side did nothing of this kind. We still cannot obtain information from them about the children who have been taken away. Their whereabouts are concealed, and there is no access for monitoring missions or for any international organizations to the places where the children are being held. Russia simplified the procedure of adoption of Ukrainian children for its citizens, all in order to make those children Russian citizens as quickly as possible. As I have already said, many children were taken away during the hostilities. Some of the children were taken away from the families during filtration, when children with their parents try to leave the combat zone. Filtration is a shameful practice of the Russians. The so-called filtration points, where all those who try to leave the zone of hostilities and still checked, they check all the things, phones. If they found any danger in their parents, they were taken to a known direction. And a child also was taken by the so-called Russian guardianship authorities. Many things are not discussed at all, and we have to speak about what's going on. In what way children find themselves in a zone of influence of Russian propaganda in the occupied by Russia territories. There are now hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian children in the education system which Russia created, who end up in special militarized camps, who are re-educated, as they call them, new Russians. And this is another danger. If at the beginning of the war, children were taken further inland Russia, now they do not need to be taken far to carry out the Russification and militarization of Ukrainian children. Everything happens right in the territory of the occupied regions. This is necessary, and in fact, this dialogue will begin long before the actual peace negotiations. I am certain of that, because a long-term peace, which we strive for, is impossible without Ukraine return all of its prisoners, including children, who we also consider to be its prisoners. I would like to give you one example. Russians also consider children to be their prisoners. The round of negotiations in Turkey, in Istanbul, and the Ukrainian side tried to include the topic of illegal removal of the children in the dialogue in order to get at least some of the children to return them to Ukraine. A list of verified names of children was given, about 300 children, who we know exactly where they are in Russia. First of all, they rejected any serious talks on this topic. There was an ugly remark from the head of their group that again, you are trying to put pressure on European grandmothers with these children topics. Even if put that aside, the next proposal from them was that it's possible to include those children to the list of prisoners of war for the next exchange. This was not done. This topic was later hidden somewhere among the others. However, it says that they really believe that the children they have kidnapped to be their prisoners. We couldn't believe it, but it's true.
This brings me quite nicely on to the next question. These are war crimes that Russia are committing. Not only are they committing it on the battlefield, but they are also doing it to Ukrainian children. Do you think it's important that Russia is held accountable for breaching the Geneva Convention and laws on humanity?
You know that arrest warrants have been issued for both President Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova, specifically for illegal deportation and abduction of children. The Ukrainian prosecutor's office has opened a case against 22 more Russians who contributed to the removal of children. Their names are unknown. I'm sure they have to face fair punishment for what they have done. The system of so-called work they do on Ukrainian children says not only about war crimes, but they may be indicators of crimes against humanity. But all of this should be practically implemented after the end of the war. We hope that the International Criminal Court will be active in this, and everyone who is guilty of the fact that our children were held under the power of the Russians will be punished fairly. I think it would be worth telling a few stories of such children who are the most vivid illustration of how this happens, because any true story reveals the essence of this process from all sides. In my view, one of the most striking stories is the story of Margarita Prokopenko from Kherson. This is about how they behave in the occupied territories and more generally how they treat children's rights. It was the time when Kherson was still in occupation. A wife of one of the Russian deputies, Mironov, came to Kherson. She chose a girl for herself. She was brought to Russia, and this girl, Margarita Prokopenko, her name was changed to Marina Mironova. They adopted her. The Ukrainian side found out that this child has an older brothers and sisters. She was not an orphan at all, but this demonstrates how they treat the occupied territory, how they treat children, how they can behave They came and chose the kids like choosing a pet in a pet shop. It's not just a disgrace, it's brazen and horrifying. The change of the name. The child was 10 months old when it was changed. Of course, she's not aware of where she was born. She may never find out about her homeland, about her past. So this became known quite accidentally. They themselves mentioned it somewhere in the media. But changing the name, the second name without any agreement with the Ukrainian side, it looks terrible. One of the most vivid stories is the story of Bogdan Yermohin. The reason I mention it, I talk about it a lot because, first of all, I know this boy and he is old enough to testify. His testimony became vivid to understand how it happens and how it affects children. Bogdan was in Mariupol. He was taken out of Mariupol while the Russians were moving into the area. He was already old enough to understand that he does not want to be in Russia. They tried to send him to an adopted family. He tried several times to escape to Ukraine. Twice they caught him at the border until he recorded a video and posted it online. It was an appeal to the president of Ukraine. So until it was seen by a huge amount of people, only after that, and with the involvement of the Vatican and many international organizations, enormous pressure was put on the Russians, and they were ultimately forced to release him. The main danger for Bogdan was that he was about to turn 18, and they were already preparing a summon for him to join the Russian army. The fact that he was old enough gave an opportunity for him to get his bearings and achieve the goal to return. Now he talks a lot about his story everywhere, including the international platforms. We are very grateful to him for his courage. There is another equally vivid story, Ilya, a boy from Mariupol. I also know him and his grandmother personally. A tragic story. He came under shelling together with his mother, and his mother was killed immediately, and he was wounded in the leg. He was taken to hospital in Donetsk. They immediately started telling him that now you are a Russian child and you are going to be sent for adoption. Meanwhile, the grandmother in Ukraine tried to establish guardianship, which she managed to do in order to come and take the child. She had to prove she was a relative so that she had the right to pick him up. It took many months. Imagine the state of the grandmother of the boy who lost his mother and didn't know if he would be able to return home. I think these illustrations show how they treat their citizens. And of course, we're the citizens of the country they attacked. They do not care about the laws or the human rights to be safe and to define their fate. It's difficult to describe their attitude to human rights. For them, they probably do not exist.
Madam First Lady, I wonder if I could end with a rather personal question. Did you think that the war would go on as long as it has done, now that we're entering the 5th year? And can I also ask, what toll has it taken on you?
We always wanted for this war to be over as soon as possible. Of course, we didn't think that it would last for that long as it's going now. Every day, we dream that the end is near. This is the worst period in my life. I think that every Ukrainian can agree with me. I do not know if anyone can tell you that he's an absolutely happy person now, even if your life is full of wonderful events, even if the war has not touched you personally. We all live under grey sky with the pressure of the fact that we are living in a war. We never wanted this, never strived for it, and never expected that we would have such a fight to live during the war. I really want to look back and say that this was it. It's over. I dream of this so that we no longer have to carry this burden. It's very difficult, very, very hard. Again, probably it's the worst period of my life. No, maybe, but for sure. If enough had been done, it would already be over.
було б закінчено.